You think you know Fridays, right? You know, burgers, fries, those red striped awnings. But
Hmm.
what if I told you that some locations were actually intentionally designed to lose money?
Yeah, you heard that right.
Unprofitable franchising.
Exactly.
And it all kind of leads back to this recent bankruptcy filing.
Pretty fascinating.
Intrigued.
Well, this isn't just like some strange thing in the restaurant business, right? It actually shows us a deeper pattern in how these global corporations structure
Oh,
themselves.
interesting.
To help us understand all of this, we're going to dive into the work of Walter Rodney.
Okay.
He was a scholar and an activist who challenged conventional thinking when it comes to economics.
More than just an academic, Rodney actually worked directly with communities in the Caribbean and Africa.
Right.
And he had this incredible ability to break down these really complex economic ideas and make them, easy to understand for everyday people.
Yeah, he was really good at that.
And he called this process groundings.
It's a great term.
I love that.
Rodney's work was so powerful because he really highlighted how systems that we think are natural or inevitable, like the way our economy works, are often, deliberately designed to benefit those in power. And he was really interested in how these structures were used to keep inequality going and to maintain control over resources.
And that brings us to TGI Fridays.
Yeah,
It's a seemingly simple case study that illustrates a much bigger problem.
it really does.
On the surface, we see this global chain of restaurants, and some are, you know, struggling to stay afloat. Others are thriving.
Yeah, and I mean, beneath the surface, we find this complex web of financial engineering, right? That allows corporations to shift profits around the world, often to avoid paying taxes.
Right, yeah.
This is where Rodney's concept of manufactured necessity comes in.
Manufactured necessity. I mean, it almost sounds like a conspiracy theory or something.
I can see why you'd say that, but not quite.
Okay.
It's really about recognizing that the complexity of these systems isn't some kind of accident. Think about Roman concrete. It's incredibly durable because of its unique chemical composition, right? Like a really intentional design that allows it to withstand all that pressure.
Oh, interesting.
And in a similar way, the complexity of this global tax system kind of reinforces itself, even when it seems illogical, and it creates this illusion of necessity.
So how does all of this work with TGI Fridays? Are they using these unprofitable franchises as like some kind of tax loophole?
That's a great question. So let's break it down.
Right.
These corporations, like Fridays, they use these subsidiaries in countries with low corporate tax rates.
Gotcha.
And these subsidiaries might own, like, the brand's trademarks or intellectual property, essentially becoming a separate entity within the main company.
Okay, so you have the actual restaurants operating in one place, but the profits are being sent to a subsidiary in a completely different country with a much lower tax rate.
Exactly.
Clever, but shady.
Right. And this is usually done through something called internal pricing.
Internal price.
Yeah. Basically, it's a system where different parts of the company, they buy and sell stuff from each other, but they manipulate the prices. This lets them shift profits to those low tax places while also minimizing how much they owe in taxes in countries where they're making a lot of money.
So they're basically creating this distance between where the money is made and where it's reported.
Right. And Rodney actually breaks this down into 3 types of distance.
3 types.
Yeah. First, there's physical distance, like the actual geographic separation between where business is happening and where the profits end up.
That makes sense.
Then you have what's called knowledge distance.
Okay.
These structures are often so complicated that it's almost impossible to figure out what's really going on without, like, specialized expertise.
Yeah.
So this creates this information asymmetry where the people who made the system have a big advantage.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And lastly, you have power distance. The decisions about, like, how these franchises are set up, where the profits go, how the taxes are paid, all of that stuff is usually decided in, like, boardrooms thousands of miles away, super far from the communities they actually affect.
So these 3 distances, right? Physical,
Yeah.
knowledge, and power, they all work together to concentrate control in the hands of just a few people, right?
Right.
And it limits the ability of local communities and even governments to have any say over their own economies.
Exactly.
And TGI Fridays, they're like the poster child for all 3 distances, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like a textbook example of what Rodney called modern colonial economics, right?
Modern colonial economics.
Yeah, so instead of like armies and direct rule, this system uses that global financial architecture to basically copy these patterns of exploitation and resource extraction.
Wow.
Often with the help of local elites.
It's kind of disturbing to think that something as normal as like a chain restaurant
Mm-hmm.
could be part of this system that makes global inequality worse, you know? But how does the system actually benefit these big corporations? Like, is it really all about saving a few bucks on taxes?
Well, yeah, I mean, tax avoidance is definitely a big part of it,
Uh-huh.
but it's not the whole story. These complex structures, they also help to hide the flow of money,
Right.
which makes it tough for regulators and tax authorities to, like, actually track the profits and make sure that corporations are paying their fair share.
Right.
And this lack of transparency creates, like, all these opportunities for financial tricks, right? From moving profits around to money laundering and all that.
So it's not just about paying less in taxes. It's about making a system where they can basically do whatever they want.
Pretty much.
But there had to be consequences to this, right? This can't just be like some theoretical game that corporations and accountants play.
Oh, yeah. No, the consequences are very real.
Yeah.
And local communities and workers, they feel them the most.
Right.
When these corporations don't pay taxes in the countries where they actually do business, it really hurts those governments. It makes it harder for them to fund important stuff like education, healthcare, and infrastructure.
So these corporations are not only taking wealth from these communities, but they're also preventing them from getting the resources they need to thrive, right?
Yeah,
Like a vicious cycle
exactly.
that just makes inequality worse and stops economic development.
Exactly. That's
Yeah, yeah.
precisely it. And that's why Rodney's work is so important. He helps us see that these systems aren't just like fated to be this way.
Mhm.
They are the result of human choices and actions,
Right.
which means we can change them. We actually have the power to create a more just and fair economic system,
That's encouraging.
one that actually puts the needs of people and communities above corporate profits, right?
Yeah. But if these systems are so deeply embedded, how do we even start to dismantle them? It feels like an impossible task.
It's definitely a challenge, but I don't think it's impossible. Like, the first step is just awareness, right?
Okay.
We have to understand how these systems work, how they affect our lives and how they keep inequality going.
Right.
Once we can really see the problem, then we can start to imagine solutions.
So it's about educating people, giving them the tools to see these patterns and demand change, right? But, I mean, awareness alone isn't enough, right? Like, what concrete steps can we take to really challenge these systems?
Well, one really important step is promoting transparency.
Okay.
We need to shine a light on all that shady stuff in corporate finance, right?
Yeah.
Make it easier for people to see where their money's going, who's benefiting, and who's being exploited.
Right.
So that means pushing for, stricter financial disclosure rules,
Mm-hmm.
supporting investigative journalism that exposes corporate bad behavior,
Right.
and holding our elected officials responsible for making sure everyone plays by the rules.
Transparency is essential, but it feels like, we're just reacting. Are there ways that we can be proactive and build a system that's more fair from the start?
For sure. Like, we need to empower local communities so they can take charge of their own economies, right?
Right.
So that means backing policies that encourage local ownership and entrepreneurship,
Open.
supporting worker-owned co-ops,
Yeah.
and setting up community-based financial institutions that put local needs first.
So it's about shifting the focus from global corporations to local economies, right? Like realizing that real wealth comes from people, not just some abstract financial stuff.
Exactly. And we also need to challenge that, that popular idea that these complex systems are just necessary. Like, there's no other way to have a global economy.
Right.
We need to be bold in imagining and fighting for alternatives, even if they seem radical or impossible at first.
Like what are some examples of those alternatives that could really promote economic democracy and local control?
Well, one promising example is that growing movement for a global minimum tax.
Oh, yeah. I've heard about this.
So this is led by the OECD, and it aims to stop corporations from just shifting their profits to low-tax countries by setting a minimum tax rate
Right.
that every country would agree to enforce.
So it's about trying to level the playing field and making sure that corporations pay their fair share no matter where they're doing business.
Exactly.
That sounds like a good step.
Yeah, it's a big step in the right direction. And then there are other initiatives that are starting to gain traction too.
Like what?
Well, another encouraging one is the EU's BeFit initiative.
BeFit?
Yeah, this proposal would basically standardize how corporate taxes are calculated across the EU, right?
Okay.
So it would be much harder for companies to take advantage of loopholes and, like, inconsistencies in the different national tax systems.
Right.
It's an ambitious effort to close those gaps that allow corporations to kind of game the system and avoid paying their taxes.
It sounds ambitious.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, these are all encouraging signs.
Uh,
But I'm sure these initiatives are getting pushback from powerful groups, right?
for sure.
So how can we as individuals support these efforts and help them succeed? It's really important to remember that change doesn't just happen, overnight.
Right.
These systems have been built up over decades, maybe even centuries.
Right.
But every little thing we do, no matter how small it seems, it helps build momentum for a future that's more fair and just.
Right. Yeah.
So by staying informed, talking about these things, and backing groups that are fighting for economic justice, we can all play a part in creating a world where the economy actually helps people and communities, not just corporations and the super rich.
Yeah. It's about understanding our power, like
Mhm.
our collective power to demand change and not just accept the way things are.
Exactly.
But it's easy to feel overwhelmed. When you think about how huge and complex this problem is,
I get that.
how can we stay motivated and not feel powerless against these systems that seem so strong?
I think it's important to focus on the real tangible ways that these systems affect our own communities. Just look around your neighborhood, your city, your state.
Mm-hmm.
Are there local businesses that are struggling because they can't compete with big corporations that aren't paying their fair share?
Right.
Are public services being cut because there's not enough tax money?
Right.
Are workers being exploited because they don't have any other options?
Right. Yeah.
By connecting these global issues to our own everyday experiences, we can start to see the problem as something that we can actually do something about.
So it's about taking it back to like a personal level
Exactly.
and remembering that this is actually affecting us.
Right. And remember, change often starts locally. By supporting those local businesses, speaking up for fair labor practices, and demanding transparency from our elected officials,
Mhm.
we can create those ripple effects that can eventually challenge those bigger systems.
That's about taking back control.
Yeah.
Right? Like remembering that we have the power to shape the world we want to live in.
That's
And TGI Friday is this, seemingly ordinary example. It really highlights how even the most normal parts of our lives are connected to these bigger systems of power and inequality.
Yeah, it really does.
So it's a call to action, right? It's like an invitation to look deeper and really understand the forces that shape our world.
Absolutely.
And once we see them, then we can start to imagine and build something better. Like a future where the economy works for everyone and everyone has a chance to succeed.
A future where economic systems serve everyone, not just a select few.
Exactly. This has been The Deep Dive. I hope you all enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
See you next time.